I wanted to follow up on a great comment that a viewer emailed me, and thanks for sending this to me. When I'm working on this, I'm looking at this from a very different point of view than you guys are. And sometimes when I'm editing the videos, I don't realize how maybe it's difficult for you to see exactly what I'm talking about because I know what I'm talking about. So we've turned the amp 90 degrees from where we had it in the last video so I can point out some of these tag strip points so you understand what I'm doing. This center point here is the ground that we're using for this RC network. And also understand the only thing that's being grounded right here is the negative side of these two capacitors that are some extra filtering and decoupling of the signal for the driver tubes. And I had another viewer comment, well, isn't that putting this on the ground creating a ground loop? I haven't found that to be the case. Using this copper wire coming over here from the center point across the top of these resistors over into our star ground point, which is these four terminals are all grounds. They're connected together. The current is going to flow through the path of least resistance, or at least most of it is. And I haven't found any problem as long as you have this wire connecting this point to the star ground of having this bolted down to the chassis, creating any kind of problems. I've built several amps using this technique. Mark over at Blue Glow shows the same thing, discusses this same issue, said he gets people emailing him saying how that's creating ground loops, and he's saying he's never seen any problem. I've never seen any problem. But if for whatever reason you just feel strongly that even though we've never seen any issues with this, that you see this as being a huge problem, you can add another terminal strip or put a wider terminal strip here that has an extra terminal down here and float the ground on another terminal and just leave these disconnected. Again, I've seen no issues with doing it this way, with bolting this down and then having a copper wire running from the same tag over to the star ground point. That said, here is where the B plus is this N terminal comes over with these two wires to the two end tags on this strip. Then it goes across this dropping resistor, this 3.6K resistor, to the positive of the capacitor, and off of this point is where we pull the driver voltage over to each one of the tag strips for the drivers. That is this N terminal here. For the ground for the drivers, we're using this second pin in, and then it's going to come across over here and also to our star ground point. In this case, I decided, because I already had a 5-terminal strip and I'm going to have an extra terminal available, that I didn't use this one that's bolted down, and then only on this one side did I use it to ground this shield, which the shield should be connected to the chassis anyway. I like having the ground next to where the input or the grid for the driver is, so that you can put the shield for the shielded wire that goes over to the volume control on the ground, and then the input goes here. We're going to connect the grid stopper from here to here. The cathode is going to go from here to here with the cathode resistor, which I think is 160 ohms in this amp, and then we're going to put the LED from here to this ground. We're also going to put the 1 meg grid leak resistor from here to here, which is the input to the ground. And that'll be all of our grounds for our driver tube. This side will be the identical, just we're going to go from here to there, from here to there. And then the plate load resistor is going to go from here to here. And then we're going to connect the coupling capacitor from here to here. And then the shade feedback resistor is going to go from here to the plate. So hopefully that kind of clears things up. And again, like over here, we're using this second terminal over where we brought all of our speaker grounds, and then this heavy 14 gauge ground from our cathode bypass capacitors and the cathode resistors for the driver tube. So now that we got all that cleared up, I want to start wiring up these driver tubes. That should only a few components there, and then we can wire up the shielded wire that goes to the volume control and the RCA jacks, and we should be ready to hook this amp up and see what kind of performance we get out of it. So, on with the show. Okay, we're going to wire up the rest of this driver stuff, and to start with, we need to tie these 3 pins together. These are the 2 diodes, and this is the cathode of the driver tube. And so we're not going to be using these upper terminals. So like we've done on other cases, we trim these off. And we're just going to connect the bottom one. And we're going to tie all 3 of those together. I made up a little jumper that looks like this. And we're going to use that to tie all 3 of these together. So we're going to hook that through that hole, pull it around there. And again, these little needle point jeweler's pliers come in real handy for stuff like this. And we'll go like that. Then we're going to come in here, get our tip clean, and solder all 3 of these together. And then we'll come in and install our 160 ohm resistor across here. In. Now the only other thing we're going to have is the LED is going to go between here and ground. So I'm going to go ahead and the LED is so tiny, which you'll see here in a minute. It was pretty much intended to be a surface mount kind of a thing. Fill this whole thing in with solder in anticipation of basically surface mounting it. So now we have the 2 diodes and the cathode running over to this tab through this 160 ohm resistor. Okay, the next thing I want to do is there's a 1 meg that needs to go from our input to ground. So I'm going to put this guy through, bend that around. Clip that off and squeeze this together. And that'll just hold that resistor in place while we try to solder it. Or try. While we do solder it, because we also have just like that, because we also have the grid stopper to put onto the grid, And again, we're not using this upper hole. So we're going to put a little bit of this Ptfe tubing on here. And it's going to go through there. Hook on there. And then bend this over. Just to hold that little guy in place. Great. Of course that falls off. Better now than when we're soldering it. Because we are going to be soldering another connection up here at the top. I'm going to go ahead and bend that one around like that too. And I'm probably going to wait and solder both this end on both of these for when we're connecting the input jacks. Go ahead and bend this over a little bit. There we go. So we'll solder this end in. And be careful you don't burn up the insulation on these wires while you're working on this. Okay. Then we need to, this is the power to the driver tube. And so we need to put our plate load resistor across here. And we're going to put it down in this bottom hole. So let's go ahead and cut that off about right there. Like that. That'll work perfect. Grab the end of this, bend it around, squeeze that together, and then I'll hold that while we solder this end. We want to make sure we leave this upper hole open and just solder the bottom hole. Then I'm going to go ahead and pull this up, bend that around, trim that off. And get that sitting right up next to that wire there and solder this together. Just like that. So now all we've got left is we've got the coupling cap that goes between the plate and the grid here. And I'm going to actually kind of bend that up like that a little bit on both ends, just to get this thing kind of away from anything that might cause a little interference here. And we want to cut this end off like that. And that's going over to there. We're going to put a couple little pieces of this Ptfe tubing just to make it look a little nicer and give this a little bit of support. And this is actually the tubing they use for, I believe they use this for 3D printing. It's got a good temperature resistance, and it's the perfect size to fit over most of these. The leads of the components that we're using in this amplifier. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And again, I'm going to show you doing this on one channel. And then I'll show you what the finished on both channels looks like. But I'm not going to go through doing just soldering these same components on the other channel because it's identical. And hopefully nobody's going to get upset or feel like they've gotten robbed of not getting to see me do it on both sides. Bend that over. Bend that over. Oh, and I'm not paying attention. I put it in here backwards. While it doesn't make a huge difference, I don't believe, the outer foil is made actually in this direction. So the signal's supposed to flow through in the direction that the print is. At least that's what I've read from Mundorf about how they label their capacitors. So let's give this every chance to not have any kind of signal degradation from not being shielded by putting this in the right direction. Just like that. So let's go ahead and solder this end first. Because we do have one last part here. This is our shade feedback resistor that's going across between this plate to this plate. So it's going to have to go through the same hole. And I try to put a little bow in the component leads and not have them just straight across. So I know there's not going to be a lot of expansion and contraction of the chassis of this amplifier. But it is nice to give a little bit of thermal expansion consideration when you're putting components into a amp, so that you don't have to worry about the heating up and cooling of these resistors ending up damaging them, because you have them soldered in place in tension with the leads perfectly straight. Okay. We need to, that's going to go in that bottom hole. Yeah, if I didn't cut this thing too short. I think I did. Wow. Well, that sucks. Wasn't paying attention and cut him too short. Cut it too short. And I was just talking about that on the camera and then screwed it up. Well, let me find another resistor. Luckily, this is an inexpensive part. Some of you may have noticed this resistor looks a little different than the other ones. These are some Ptfe resistors that are supposed to be really good sonically. And I bought a bunch of these at one point because I found that 300K really works good for these feedback resistors to my taste. And so I went ahead and got enough of them where I can use these for my feedback resistors. So let's solder this little guy in, and we're done with the driver tube wiring. And then all we've got left, guys, is the RCA jacks, which are kind of a pain, but we'll get through it. Okay, so now we turn this end off. Actually, let's go ahead and just bend that around. Like that. Put a little hook in it. Like I said, make sure there's a little sag in that resistor. Solder that up. And there we go. There's our driver tube wiring. So I'm going to go ahead and wire up this other side and come back and show you what that looks like. And I think that'll be a wrap for this video. And then we just have to wire up the RCA jacks and the volume control, and we're going to be done with this thing. Hope you're enjoying this series. If you are, please sub to the channel, like the video, and we'll see you real soon for some more 6SQ7 fun. Have a great day.